The early 1960s were a fantastic time, assuming your idea of fun was constant, low-grade existential dread. The two global landlords, the USA and the Soviet Union, were locked in the Cold War, a wonderfully passive-aggressive conflict where the main sport was stockpiling enough nuclear weapons to turn the planet into a radioactive parking lot. Fresh off the Bay of Pigs fiasco, where the U.S. sponsored a spectacularly failed invasion of Cuba, President John F. Kennedy needed a win. Meanwhile, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev saw an opportunity to balance the scales and, perhaps, protect his new socialist friend in the Caribbean. You see, America had this charming habit of placing its own nuclear missiles right on other people's doorsteps, specifically Jupiter missiles in Turkey. These little beauties could hit Moscow in about 15 minutes, which, understandably, made the Soviets a tad twitchy. So, Khrushchev looked at Cuba, a mere 90 miles from Florida, and had a thought. A simple, elegant, terrifyingly logical thought. If the Americans could have missiles in his backyard, why couldn't he have some in theirs? It's only fair, really. The Soviet plan to ship nuclear missiles to Cuba was codenamed Operation Anadyr, and the level of secrecy was just theatrical. Soviet soldiers were told they were heading to a cold region, issued winter gear like skis and parkas, and loaded onto ships. Imagine their surprise when they docked in tropical Cuba, a place where the only ice you'd find was in a mojito. The goal was to get everything set up before the Americans, who were flying spy planes over the island almost daily, a brilliant plan with absolutely no flaws. On October 14, 1962, a U-2 spy plane did its usual flyover. When the photos were developed, analysts saw something that wasn't supposed to be there. Clear evidence of medium-range ballistic missile sites under construction. The news reached President Kennedy the morning of the 16th. Suddenly, the abstract threat of nuclear war had a mailing address, and it was just off the coast of Miami. The collective response in the White House was a calm, measured, "Oh, we are in trouble." Kennedy immediately assembled a group of his top advisors, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, or ExComm. Their job was simple: figure out how to get the missiles out of Cuba without ending the world. No pressure. The initial mood leaned heavily towards bomb them into the Stone Age. Air Force General Curtis LeMay argued that anything less than a full military strike was appeasement, because historically, massive preemptive attacks have always calmed things down. Thankfully, some in the room suggested not starting World War III just yet. The idea of a naval blockade emerged. But you can't just call it a blockade, because under international law, a blockade is an act of war. So the Kennedy administration, in a brilliant feat of public relations, decided to call it a quarantine. It sounds so much friendlier, doesn't it? Less, we're going to sink you, and more, we're just checking you for invasive species, like nuclear warheads. On October 22nd, Kennedy went on television and told the American people and the world about the missiles. He announced the quarantine would begin on the 24th. The entire planet held its breath. Soviet ships, some likely carrying more military equipment, were steaming towards Cuba. The U.S. Navy was waiting for them. For the first time in history, the Strategic Air Command was ordered to DEFCON 2, the highest level of readiness short of actual world-ending war. Everything was fine. Things peaked on Saturday, October 27th, a day so stressful it makes your worst Monday look like a spa retreat. First, a U-2 spy plane flown by Major Rudolph Anderson was shot down over Cuba by a Soviet SAM missile. This was a huge escalation. The Joint Chiefs of Staff unanimously recommended an immediate retaliatory airstrike. Kennedy, miraculously, decided to wait, a decision that probably saved your grandparents. As if one downed plane wasn't enough, the universe decided to add a dash of pure chaos. Another U-2 pilot, taking an air sampling mission near the North Pole, got lost. His compass malfunctioned and he accidentally strayed into Soviet airspace over Siberia. The Soviets scrambled MiG fighters to intercept him. The US, in turn, scrambled F-102 fighters from Alaska to protect him. Here's the fun part. Those American fighters were armed with nuclear-tipped air-to-air missiles. We almost started a nuclear war because a guy took a wrong turn. But the real closest call happened underwater, completely hidden from the world. The Soviet submarine B-59, armed with a nuclear torpedo, was cornered by the US Navy. The Americans were dropping small, non-lethal depth charges, trying to force it to surface. Down in the hot, stuffy sub, the captain thought war had started and decided to launch their special weapon. Launch required the unanimous consent of 3 officers. 2 agreed. The third, a man named Vasily Arkhipov, said no. He single-handedly vetoed the apocalypse. While all this was happening, Khrushchev was apparently having a very emotional day. 2 messages arrived from Moscow. The first was a long, rambling, personal letter offering to remove the missiles in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade Cuba. The second, which arrived hours later, was a much harsher, official broadcast demanding the U.S. also remove its missiles from Turkey. This threw XCOM into a loop. Which offer do you respond to? The nice one or the mean one? This led to one of the most brilliant diplomatic maneuvers ever, known as the trollop ploy, named after a novelist's trick. The strategy was simple. Just pretend you never got the second, harder message. So Kennedy's team crafted a public response that accepted the terms of the first, more reasonable letter. It was the political equivalent of seeing a text you don't want to deal with and saying, "Oh, weird, I never got that." Publicly, they ignored the Turkey demand. Privately, they sent the president's brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, to meet with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin. In this secret back-channel meeting, RFK confirmed the deal. The U.S. would publicly pledge not to invade Cuba. And, he added, while it couldn't be part of the formal agreement, those Jupiter missiles in Turkey, well, they were a bit old anyway. They'd probably be gone within 6 months. The secret trade was made. On Sunday, October 28th, Moscow radio broadcast Khrushchev's announcement that the missiles would be dismantled and returned to the Soviet Union. The crisis was over. People literally cheered in the streets. In the court of public opinion, Kennedy had won. He stared down the Soviets and they blinked. Khrushchev, on the other hand, was seen as having caved. The secret part of the deal, the part where he actually got exactly what he wanted regarding the Turkish missiles, remained secret for years. So, the world avoided nuclear winter. Hooray! The big takeaway for both sides was the terrifying realization of how easily a global catastrophe could be triggered by miscommunication. This led to the creation of the Moscow-Washington hotline in 1963. It wasn't a cool red telephone like in the movies, but a teletype machine, basically a secure text line. Because after almost deleting humanity, they figured it might be a good idea for the two most powerful men in the world to be able to talk directly. The Cuban Missile Crisis is a masterclass in how pride, paranoia, and a series of terrible assumptions can bring civilization to the brink. It was solved not through military might, but through a messy, secret, face-saving compromise where both sides got to pretend they were the tough guy. It's a sobering reminder that history is often just a sequence of very powerful, very stressed people trying desperately to clean up a mess of their own making, and we were all just along for the ride. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!